So this morning, I would like to introduce first the host, Aunor, who will be holding the space for the conversation. Aunor Lada is a writer and a speaker and an activist. Aunor focuses on the intersection of political organizing, system thinking, and narrative work. He was the co-founder and executive director of The Rules, a global network of activists, researchers, and writers focused on addressing the root causes of our civilizational polycrisis. Aunor comes from a Sufi lineage and also explores and writes about the intersection between politics and spirituality in troubled times. And Aunor is a co-founder of Tierra Valiente, a post-capitalist community in northern Costa Rica. So he's with us this morning from Costa Rica, from the jungle of Costa Rica. Welcome, Aunor. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. And it's an honor to be introducing Vandana. I think Vandana is going to do some opening remarks and we'll open the space. And I'll just give a brief intro to Vandana before we do that. And then we'll move into a Q&A. I think most people know Vandana's work. And she's been a big influence on many of us in both the world of the worlds of activism, organic farming, biodiversity, science for social good, and many other fields. She's a physicist, an ecologist, an activist, a writer. She's wrote dozens of books and edited dozens of articles. She's the founder of Navdanya, which is a movement for biodiversity conservation and farmers' rights. She's also the founder and director for the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Natural Resource Policy. And she's one of the great living activists and really a treasure to the movement. And so maybe we just start with that and start with Vandana and a prayer for Vandana and her lineage and the ancestors she walks with when she does this work.
Thank you very much, Saya and Mauricio. Thank you, Aunor. Thank you for all of you who are here for this dialogue, Wisdom in Our Times, and for an amazing group that attracted me immediately, Science and Non-Duality. Because my life's journey has been precisely a journey of a science that's not dualistic. That's why I went into looking at the foundations of quantum theory, being totally dissatisfied with trying to make sense of a rich living world. I grew up in the forests of the Himalaya, and Aunor, I can see the forest behind you. I'm right now sitting in what used to be my mother's cow shed, and when I wanted to leave academics, and I was in doubt, how will I do this work for the earth? And my mother said, want to give up your job? Just give it up and take the cow shed. Don't worry about rents. Don't worry about funds. And this is where I started the Research Foundation 40 years ago. My search for the foundations of quantum theory was for a non-dualistic science. And I noticed one of the words that came from the participants was potentiate. That's what quantum theory does. Yeah. Mechanical physics gets you stuck. You're a lump. You just sit there. You can't change till there's a force that hits you. And you can't be related to another lump. So we are all separate. My thesis was on non-locality and non-separability and indeterminism in quantum theory, the basic principles. But around that same time, having seen a forest disappear in my mountains before I left for Canada to study quantum theory, I came across this amazing movement just by hearsay. I was troubled about the forest, and people said, but the Chipko has started, and Chipko means to hug. And I'm waiting for the end of the corona lockdown for us to hug the trees and hug each other again with love, with our fullness, with our being part of the earth. So I learned how to hug from Chipko. Of course, I learned how to hug my parents. But Chipko, from ordinary village women who'd never been to school up in the Himalayan forest. I learned they were experts of biodiversity, and I learned humility. I've done nuclear physics. And you get here because you're trained in an hierarchy. And of course, you think you know more. And then there were these amazing women who didn't just know every herb, every plant, but they knew how the forest connects to the water, the soil. And they said, these are not timber mines. These are the sources of our water, our soil, our fresh air. And now, 40 years later, the UN talks about the ecological functions of biodiversity. Just yesterday was the International Biodiversity Day, and there's a lot of talk on this. But if they only talk to indigenous people, not only would they know that people know that there are biodiverse functions, and people recognizing the contributions, protect the mountain, protect the forest. Unlike what's going on where saying, oh, we extracted the resources, the minerals, the oil. Now let's extract the functions of the biodiversity. And that's a new aspect of my work on non-duality. I wasn't supposed to be in agriculture. But 1984, the place where I had studied for my MSc honors in physics erupted in violence. And I then realized that something was wrong. That same year, Bhopal disaster happened. So I started to look at what's going on. I did a book for the United Nations University. And I realized that not only had we separated ourselves from nature, but we had brought the war, the concentration camp, the war chemicals from Hitler into our food production. And since that day, I took a pledge that I would walk the path of a non-violent farming based on our relationship with living soil, living plants, living biodiversity. And 3 years later, I'm with these chemical companies who now talk about patenting the seed. And a patent means a claim to invention. And they said, we'll do genetic engineering in order to take a patent, and we'll have a global law to make it illegal for any farmer to have their own seed. I heard them. I said, this is an empire of a life, and you don't invent the seed. The seed is not a machine. And that's when I realized there was not just a dualism being introduced between life and the chemical industry, but an hierarchy of knowledge being created because women have evolved the seed. Nature has given the seed. And our pledge in Navdanya is we've received these seeds from nature and our ancestors. And we owe it to future generations to hand them over in the beauty, integrity, diversity in which we received it. And that's the work we do. We were just saving the seed as our spiritual duty to the earth and to creation. In the process, an agriculture has evolved, which could feed 2 times India's population. And if we worked with nature, we worked with the laws of biodiversity, we could actually feed 2 times the world's population. We wouldn't need 1 billion people to be starving, and we wouldn't need 2 billion people to be very sick. Which brings me to another duality. The duality that was created between people and some people. You see, the same anthropocentrism that said we are separate from nature, written into Bacon saying masculine birth of time, we are not part of nature, we are master and conquerors. Boyle saying the idea of a sacred nature comes in the way of our building an empire over lesser creatures. But the lesser creatures were not just the plants and the animals, the lesser creatures including anyone with a slightly darker color than a European white. The blacks then became property to be taken as slaves. It redefined women to be passive objects. And it turned a whole hierarchy. It created an hierarchy in religion, making one religion a civilizing mission. But all this went hand in hand with desacralizing our world, desacralizing the living world, desacralizing our bodies. And I can't believe the so-called science that says the mind is the brain here and the body is separate and it's not thinking. And people who work, the peasants, the farmers, the women, are unthinking bodies. And the real minds have to escape from their bodies ever since the time of Descartes to get real knowledge. I would have thought this illusion that has brought us to such a brink of destruction. It has caused the 6 mass extinction. It has driven the climate catastrophe. It has turned half of humanity into refugees. It has created unemployment. It has desertified the soils, created a water crisis. And yet, that path of escape from the body, of man's mastery over the living world, doesn't stop. I'm just reading a book and I'd like to share it with this community. Yeah, so let me just share this with you, because this is the kind of time we're in. Descartes said there's res extensa and res completans, there's tables and chairs and length and breadth and marks. That's it. There's nothing else in the world. And the mastery is to be able to measure it, not to live in it, not to experience its sacredness. And his whole thinking, the Cartesian philosophy, was escaping from a body that distracts you. Even though in Indian philosophy, not only is the body in the mind, but it has layers and layers and layers of interconnectedness with the sacred living universe. Everything is an expression of the divine. And we connect to the divinity of others through the food. That's why, for me, food as the currency of life, of sacredness, is so important. Through the breath, through knowing, it's not an accident that Indians love to use their hands. We even eat with our hands, because sensory knowledge is very, very important in a living world. We know and interact through discrimination. Vijnan, our word for science, is the ability to separate falsehood from truth, the ethical from the unethical, dharma from adharma. And then, of course, bliss, when you have managed to really know you are one, non-dual, sacred, divine universe. But this is the world, a bunch of overgrown boys playing with toys in Silicon Valley are thinking. They say we've got to complete Descartes' work of escaping from the prison of the body. This sacred body is a prison. And then Ray Kurzweil, who is the Google's head advisor at NICE, says, we will be software. What, after all, is the difference between a human who has upgraded her body and brain using nanotechnology and computational technology, and a robot who has gained an intelligence? No difference. But worse, because you are a spiritual group, these people have slept through the fact that we are spiritual beings. Civilizations over thousands of years, 60,000 years of Australian Aboriginal knowledge is about the sacred. That we are spiritual beings seeking our humanity and our earthiness to live in the right livelihood on this planet. And here they want, within a decade, they want us all imprisoned in digital prisons. I mean, I've written a new blog on my reflections of my 5-decade journey, and I ended it with a new patent I found, number 060606, on patenting human body functions and human brain functions, and creating a whole new economy from that, allocating to us the value of who we are. Not value from within, but value through a cryptocurrency. And one cryptocurrency transaction I found takes more energy than an entire household in America, which is very wasteful in energy anyway. But this is what Ray is thinking of. He's written a book called The Age of the Spiritual Machine. Our civilization, for the first time, will have the ability to be spiritual. Our civilization will then expand outward, turning all the dumb matter and energy. It's not dumb. They made a mistake saying, your prayer in the beginning about Mother Earth was so beautiful. Mother Earth is living, and she's divine. It was that Cartesian divide, the Newtonian divide, that said nature is dead matter, which we can manipulate to will. They're still stuck with that 200, 300-year-old mistake. Dumb matter and energy we encounter into sublimely intelligent, transcendent matter and energy. We'll make it through our machines and computers. So in a sense, we can say the singularity, because they believe this merger with the machine is a singularity. They say for the first time, merging with the machine, not with the universe, not with the consciousness of the universe, but that merger with the machine will ultimately infuse the universe with spirit. Could there be a bigger illusion than this? This is our work as a community, to be able to work with the spiritual forces to prevent this dystopia from becoming the reality.
Thank you for that, Vandana. Beautiful. Thank you for the overview and the reminders. And I want to get back to a lot of the things you said, but maybe we start and root in the spiritual and in the personal. And just to hear a little bit about your spiritual journey. And when we were talking last week, you mentioned where you were in near Rishikesh in the valley, near the Ganga, and all the teachers and influences you had and your parents had. And maybe we start with that place in the spiritual journey, and then we will come back to Ray Kurzweil, if you will.
So I'm very blessed to have been born in the Himalaya, to have grown up in the Himalaya, which is really the land where everyone comes who's a spiritual teacher. And I grew up with my parents teaching us, don't hurt the tree, don't pluck a flower without apologizing. So our very training was in that spiritual tradition of the earth as sacred and living. But because at that time, and I'm talking about the 60s and 70s, some of the most important gurus and teachers of India lived in my valley and in Rishikesh. Ananda Mahima was up the road from where I am right now. Sant Kripal Singh was our spiritual teacher. Shivanand, Swami Shivanand, amazing. And my father actually wrote the contract for the transcendental Mahesh Yogi to be able to create his huts, where the Beatles then came and did transcendental meditation. So I know our weekends were either in the forest or visiting a spiritual. We were very young, but all of that seeped into us. And my parents were very, very spiritual. And both of them, before they went, they announced, and now I'm going. And part of what our dear Ray Kurzweil that I quoted you, part of what they're trying to do is we've got to make our body a machine so we don't die. They have no idea that it's just another transformation. And both my mother and my father realized that we are part of a bigger world, and birth and death are part of the same cycle. And they went with consciousness, they said their goodbyes. And I just feel blessed to have had parents like that and to have been exposed to the teachers who have shaped India's spiritual tradition in our modern times.
And how did that influence shape your political work? What's the correlation with this, if you will?
Well, for me, the forest was an extension of myself, or I was an extension of the forest. And there was no separation. But also, I think that spirituality gave me the dharma to say you cannot just sit still and let harm be done. So my activism really flows out of the concept of dharma. My karma yoga is from my dharma, and my dharma comes from that spiritual exposure. Every activism of mine is for the sacredness of life, whether it be saving the seed, defending the forest, our sacred Ganga, for which so many spiritual teachers have given their lives. And now, for me, the sanctity of the human being, just because of a few boys, like them overgrown boys who knew how to do analytic algorithms a little better and make machines to work with algorithms. They're suddenly determining the future of humanity with a lot of violence, a lot of imposition. And that sacredness of being human to me is really my next step of this spiritual journey.
Maybe say a little more about that. What do you mean by next step?
Well, you know, partly because we never lived in a society where our integrity was being encroached. I was born in a post-war world. We'd seen the horrible behavior in Hitler's Germany, and the Nuremberg trials, the Nuremberg Code, the human rights. So human rights were secure. And from the 70s onwards, what I saw a bad development model do is threaten nature and the integrity of ecosystems and push species to extinction. And as I've written in one of my blogs, even the explosion of epidemic diseases, like the corona, the SARS, the Ebola, the MERS, the Nipah, are all because the forests were invaded into. And these are sacred homes of indigenous people. And the lives that are being sacrificed to defend these homes. But every virus has come from a forest animal and become a virus for us. So that was so clear. It's only with this corona and the lockdown, and every day there's a new imposition. You can't move without a surveillance system. That's for your health and safety, but it's really for surveillance. And then I come across this patent, 060606, and it's basically saying mining body activity, you know, it's going to give everyone a little watch. And mining it, of course, through computers and sensors. And then we become users of the machine. We are no more human beings. We are no more full-fledged part of a sacred universe. We are not anonymous. We are not self-organized. We aren't conscious. We are users of the machine. And then the machine, having downloaded our body data and our brain function, will go through algorithms that decide what is the right way to be. And then will allocate us value, the cyber currency value. So autonomy and sacredness is being mined without our permission. 2, we are being reduced from human beings and sentient beings and jivas to users of machine. We are appendages of machine. And then our value, you know, in a sacred universe where the divine permeates all of life, we are part of the divine. We're being turned into users, and our value is no more divinity. Our value is a cryptocurrency. This is probably, if you ask me, it's bigger than Columbus, it's bigger than slavery, it's bigger than the witch hunts, not only because all of humanity is being sucked into it, but with the narrowest of thinking, the most Cartesian mindset with the most violent instruments of control. That is why each of us seeking our full divinity, seeking our full sacredness, is also exercising our spiritual power. You know, to say dumb energy, no. Our energy as spiritual energy, it's not dumb.
So I want to talk a bit about, let's say, theory of change. You know, there's two lenses, and this is very simplistic. But one way is to say, okay, let's go out, as you called them, a handful of boys. And we have this, you know, spiritually immature, uninitiated, largely autistic, white male Silicon Valley set that is disproportionately determining future human relationship with things like artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, etc. Yeah, on the one side, and then you have the mass social movement and the role of people. But and I want to get to that, but I want to first start with this other, and start with the place of dualism, because there's a lot of fear around the dualism of the other. If we were to hold a place of compassion, and I'm not necessarily even saying recommending this, but just for the thought experiment, if we were to hold a place of compassion for the Gates, Zuckerberg, Digerati, and the role, the archetypal role they're playing in this moment of the Kali Yuga, what would you say to them? And what's your sense on how would we, if at all, shift their perspective? Is it possible?
Well, for one, I think I'm being very compassionate, calling them boys, Otherwise, I could have called them Hitler. I could have called them all the experiences of the really bad behavior. I could have called them a Rakshas, which works wonderfully in India's epic stories. So I'm giving them their humanity, except that I'm contextualizing. I mean, I've learned so much from indigenous people. And the most ordinary indigenous person has so much wisdom. And then I see these people with knowing so little about anything, except making software and gadgets that work their software. And so I feel a bit sorry for them. And that's where my compassion comes in. But my, the Durga in me says, you can't let the destructive forces determine the future. You've got to have the creative forces, the spiritual forces, play their role.
Do you feel that they're playing an archetypal role in our awakening in some way?
Oh, for sure. When I started to save seeds, I used to always be very grateful to Monsanto. I said, if they hadn't thought of patenting seed, where would I give my life to seed seeding? Where would we have saved the seeds just because they had to be saved? And we'd have soil-tolerant and flood-tolerant seeds that are today rescuing the people after the cyclone Amphan. And they rescued them in the 99 cyclone, and every 3-4 years there's a devastating cyclone. So I'm grateful that if they had just been like everyone else, well, I'd have been doing my normal thing, right? If that forest hadn't been cut, I would have lived a life of a quantum physicist, maybe somewhere. But I wanted to come back to India and say thank you, but I wanted to then protect, at that time, the forest. And now I'm very grateful because we were taking our humanity for granted. And just like people were taking the seed for granted, and it took the threat of patenting to realize, no, these seeds are not your inventions, they're not machines. Now that we are being defined into being appendages of machine, I think it is a moment to wake up to our deep humanity, our deep spirituality. So we can be grateful to them too.
Yeah, shukran. So they say in the Kali Yuga, which is the dark ages, the fourth of the 4 cycles in the Vedic cyclical history, that also the Kali Yuga is the time of the most amount of light, and it is the time of the most assistance from interdimensional beings, deities, etc. And so in some sense that our awakening is happening through our choice to be here right now, to incarnate in this period. And I want to ask you about the role of what ordinary citizens, people in the sand community, politically, what can we do? Spiritually, what can we do? And to also say there's been many conversations, I feel, even the duration of this week, where there's this idea that dualism, there's a fear of dualism, that to be an activist or to be in judgment creates more duality. And so maybe you can comment with that lens as well.
I think Indian philosophy, that way has been made sophisticated. It's realized where there are the doers, but always brought them into an interconnectedness of balance, harmony, creativity, not hierarchies. So I was talking about the different, the self, us as a being, the outermost, the food and the breath, that vijnan, that discernment, is a vital part of our consciousness. And one shouldn't be afraid of a higher consciousness. If your higher consciousness is able to guide you between doing the ethical thing and doing the unethical thing, or being a consumer that's destroying the planet and being a regenerator who is regenerating the planet. That is not dualism, it is discernment.
Beautiful, I love that. It's not dualism, it's discernment. And I think partly, you know, our fear of duality creates more duality, you know, and we have incarnated into a planet that is in the third dimension and in the material realm. And so it does require actually an understanding of duality, an understanding of consequence in order to transcend that duality. But that's the messiness of what it is to be alive. And
so you know, it's very interesting that I talked about emptying out a living earth of its life and making it dead matter in order to exploit it. And then we've had in recent times an awakening of spirituality, but a spirituality that's still outside the material world. Yeah, a lot of meditation, a lot of people come to yoga at Rishikesh. But if we realize that the universe is sacred and every living being is part of that sacredness, and each of us is interconnected, just like in quantum theory is nothing separate. We are interconnected in our being. That interconnectedness is a sacred interconnectedness, and part of it is material. Yeah? Part of it is material, not just in the sense that our bodies have to be respected, but the food we eat in India, we say Annam Brahman, that God is in the food. It's in the way you cultivate it. That's why another text, that the Upanishad says, the highest dharma is growing in giving of good food. And the worst dharma is not growing food or serving bad food. So it's not an accident that India has had such rich food traditions, because it was part of a spiritual tradition. It wasn't part of gastronomy and cuisine. It is part of doing your best through the food, because it is the sacred currency of life. But now, I've done many books on food and health, because we are now realizing that organic has far more nutrition. People eating organic can heal their damaged gut in a week. A week of a diet, getting off chemical diets, can heal. That our gut, which is called Agni in Ayurveda, this is where all the transformation takes place of the food that comes from the soil and the plants and the bees and the butterflies and the earthworms, and is transformed into becoming what we are. 60 trillion, 60 to 100 trillion, they don't know exactly. Nearly 60 to 100 trillion microbes are in our gut. And that's 90% of who we are. We are interbeings. So this idea of there's nature here and humans there is so wrong, and I feel very sad that some of my environmental friends in the West, who now talk a lot about the natural world and the natural world and the natural world, don't know how to live lives taking a sacred nature as part of who they are. It's still carrying on that ecological apartheid of separation. And now they're supporting a whole crazy idea in which Silicon Valley is finding big money. You see, 7.3 billion people could be stopped from eating real food that comes from the earth and could be forced to eat lab food. Can you imagine the market? And a lot of my environmental friends are saying, we've got to get the farmers off the land. We've got to get food into the lab. No, my 35 years of serving the earth through agriculture has shown me that agriculture is actually our best service to the earth. And when we do agriculture as service, even in the opening song, there were some beautiful lines, of let me give to you. It's only in agriculture we can give back to the earth. And by giving back to the earth, she gives us even more in abundance. And that's how we are seeing we can feed 2 times India's population. And we don't have to destroy the planet for agriculture just because GMOs destroy the Amazon. And the prairies, doesn't mean you have to assume agriculture can only be done that way, just as it's wrong to assume that human beings can only be consumers. It's wrong to assume humanity can only think mechanistically. We have so many potentiates, so many potentia. And it's this moment of very severe threat, of convergence of so many catastrophes, from the corona to the economic pandemic of half of humanity losing livelihoods, to the hunger pandemic, to the new conquest pandemic, saying, oh, new colony, our minds and bodies of these silly humans, we'll now improve them. We are at a very, very exciting moment where all the teachings of our ancestors, all the wisdoms of the past, all our own lives, consciousness and awakening, and humanity as one, in one planet, acting as one humanity, because it's not, a Zoom link. Thank you very much to Zoom, but our consciousness connects us anyway.
Oh, thank you for saying that, Vandana. It's beautiful. For those of us in the sand community, many of us living in the West, many of us living in city environments, not necessarily growing our own food. What is, as sort of an elder sister in the movement and council, what would you say to us for what we should be thinking about and what we should be doing to be more political, to support food sovereignty globally?
Well, I think we should, as a spiritual discipline, at least grow one plant. On a little windowsill, maybe 10 plants if you have a balcony, maybe 100 plants if you have a garden. Because it's like that little tulsi in every house of India, where to the sacred basil, we say, I can't take care of the whole universe, but I see the universe in you, and I will take care of you. So I think it's important just to reclaim our spiritual connection with the earth, with the seed, with the plant, with our food, with life. Second is, because of the plants, and this is the work I do, so I can tell you there's such huge investments, and there is just so much media work, and every scientific institution is talking about this lab food as the solution. I do think that a very important step is creating food communities, even where you can't grow all the food you need. Know the farmer who grows your food. And it'll be an effort. But, yoga is an effort. Destruction comes fast. You want to spray Roundup, it's very easy. You want to drop a bomb through a drone, very easy. But every activity of care is an effort. And it's only in recent times, effort for the good work, effort for care, effort for regeneration has been made to look like a drudgery. We need to reclaim the sacredness of work, the sacredness of effort. And part of that sacredness of effort is building community. We will have to reclaim the commons of our food, the commons of our life, the commons of our knowledge, the commons of our spirituality. And creating food communities is the most important thing we can do, because scientifically we know the closer the food is to home, the better it is. The more diverse the food, the happier your gut microbiome. Organic, only small farms can do that, better than chemical. So no matter which way you look, and not industrially processed, but artisanally processed, no matter which way you look, a local food economy is an ecological imperative, a climate imperative, a species imperative, a health imperative, and a spiritual imperative.
And it's interesting, this idea of reclaiming the sacredness of our effort, because there's a huge amount of effort put into propping up this existing system. It's just hidden from us. So we don't know where our waste goes, and we don't know where our food comes from or where our energy goes from, but it's huge levels of exploitation, what's the so-called development, which is essentially robbing the global south of its resources in order to prop up our way of living. And so we're at this really interesting moment with COVID, where people are starting to ask these questions, the understanding the emperor has no clothes. And so maybe we close just with assessment and understanding of COVID before we open up for questions. And what does this moment mean as the sort of so-called normality we've been living has been exposed, and that sort of the unearthing has happened, the awakening has initiated?
So, of course, the COVID and the lockdown has given a lot of space to other species. I don't use the word nature because we are nature. So when we say nature came back, we are telling ourselves we are not part of the animal world. Everywhere you see elephants and tigers and leopards roam the street. But exactly at the same time, every government is giving new clearances for more ecological destruction. Look at Trump, you could look at in India. What you said about the invisibility of destruction, therefore we don't know how we are participating. My work in agriculture, I realized that you use 10 units of energy to produce 1 unit of food in an industrial system. When you make it factory farming of animals, it's 100 units of energy to 1 unit of food. And then when you make it these sky rises with lots of electricity and lots of artificial nutrients, 4 plants need the equivalent of 30 refrigerators. So, Amazon has invested hugely. They're saying now they bought Whole Foods, and they're saying now we will, for the cities, for the vegetables, we're going to have these artificial elevated systems, which again means you are discounting the earth and our creative power. You're basically saying, soil, I don't care for you. Sun, I don't need you. But these systems will need about 1,000 units of energy to produce 1 unit of nutritionally empty food. The 2 questions I ask people who, these are always presented to me, and I say, give me your energy audit. And they don't have it, because I know it's about 1,000 times. And I say, give me your nutritional audit, because if industrial food became nutritionally empty and full of toxins, if you're not letting the soil nourish the plant, my work over these decades has shown that it's not the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, it's actually declining the soil fertility. It's the microbes that feed on the organic matter you give that create the soil fertility. And our soil has gone up 100% in nitrogen, 100% increase in carbon, 30% increase in zinc, 25% increase in magnesium. Now, these are in the plant, and then they're in our food. And then they create the metabolic balance in our food system. A lot of new work, a lot of new ecological work is being done on the total footprint of what a lot of people are thinking is an ecological alternative. But if you take all the mining, the lithium, then that electric car doesn't look so good, because Bolivia had a toppling of its elected president, Evo Morales, just for lithium, because he nationalized the lithium mining. If you add all of that, actually the footprint is so big. And I think especially in the north, where consumers are always being made to feel they're part of a green solution, but that solution is a very toxic, polluted solution and a lot of ecological damage. It just comes to our part of the world. So we are Earth citizens, I've written about Earth democracy. I see us as members of the Earth family. And as members of the Earth family, I've been sending these messages to the Burnings and the others saying, you can't have a Green New Deal, which is about the Earth, as a national system. You have to have a new relationship with the Earth at the planetary level. And that's what we are working on. And that's how the footprint will reduce, and the heart print and the head print and the hand print will increase as we build local economies.
Beautiful. Thank you, Vandana. And yeah, it's interesting that you sit in your cowshed that's full circle, as and from a
full circle for me. Yeah, I mean, I could have been stuck in a hotel room, or I could have been stuck in my Delhi, a place where I, some of my official work I do from there. But I just came here literally in the nick of time, and I'm so grateful.
And I think it's a full circle moment for many people, right? We're you know, that the old T.S. Eliot quote, at the end of all our exploring, we will arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And
Yes.
this is the moment of really questioning everything from our fear of death to the way we're consuming, to how we're contributing to the system, to how do we want to live going forward.
That's exactly it. Exactly. And what are the choices we can make with a full consciousness, being aware of what our consumption costs to the earth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. And with that, maybe I'll open it up for questions and just moment of transparent facilitation. Lisa or Maurizio and Zaya, do you want me to field that, or we'll do open questions on the chat box?
We can do that.
Yeah, we have access to the mute, unmute. We have a system.
Perfect.
Thank you, Vandana. Thank you,
Vandana.
Honor.
Thank
you, Vandana.
Full circle, exactly. Yes, absolutely. You've given us so much food for thought and so many seeds and so many reflections and possibilities to expand the horizons of the choices we actually can make. And thank you. There's a lot of questions actually coming up. Vijay, you are unmuted.
Okay, thank you, Zaya. Vandana, it was so overwhelming, whatever you said, and I saw how people were tearing up and they were saying so while you were saying all of this. So I wanted to ask a quick question, but I also want to put a context around it. The question is this a divine coincidence that in this 50th year of Earth Day, we have COVID coming? And, you know, we have this, I have a National Geographic, which actually I asked about it earlier in one of the sessions, that basically says on this 50th year of Earth Day, we should be looking at what is going to be happening in 2070, which is 500th year of Earth Day. And it paints two scenarios. One, basically, and National Geographic is all about nature. It paints two scenarios. One is about how we will destroy the Earth, and other scenario where it says how we will save the Earth. And it has got articles around both of these with some, you know, proofs of concept of things that can be done. And you are actually the thick of, as I could gather, you are in the thick of all of that. And you have the influence to shape the policies, social policies, industrial policies, and scientific policies. So, and I also heard in Indian Prime Minister's industrial policy about go vocal about local, be vocal about local. And so basically a big country, second largest country in the world, basically saying that, Prime Minister saying that. So basically something that this COVID is, and it is a post-COVID pronouncement that he is making. So is there a hope that we will actually save the Earth? Or will we destroy the Earth based on what your assessment is? You know, actually, I'm one of those boys of Silicon Valley. I'm in the middle of Silicon Valley. And I also know that Federico Faggin, who comes to SAN very often, he invented the microprocessor, which is creating this whole platter for the artificial intelligence people. But he today, 50 years later, and it's again 50 years, you know, divine coincidence, that he is turned completely towards consciousness. And he is one of those boys who's now in this world. So are these people going to be empowered in the post-COVID era because it's going to shock us so much?
Thank you. Beautiful, Vijay. Thank you. Beautiful.
Well, Federico did 25 years of spiritual sitting. He really, while he was inventing, he was doing also his spiritual work. So that really brought him back to consciousness.
Which reminds me, one more guru of my childhood. We used to be very close. My family was very close to Neem Karoli Baba, to whom I think Steve Jobs didn't meet him, but he went to the ashram and then was enlightened by him. So, you know, the question that Vijay asked about the two, hope doesn't come from the skies. Hope is not an inevitability. Hope is cultivated. And cultivating hope in the midst of despair is spiritual practice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
Timothy and your partner, I forgot your name. I'm sorry. You are muted.
Okay, great. Thank you for having us. Jessica.
Hey,
Hi, Jessica, sorry.
Jessica asked a question yesterday, so I get to ask one today. And just saying hi to Elnor, just a quick shout out from Dominique, our retreat center, to Elnor's in Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, Vandana, I'm very, very curious about your perspective on the theory of consciousness that Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose put out, where it can be located, a quantum process may be located in the brain itself. Could you expand on that and let me know what your perspective on that particular approach might be?
Well, some brain functions and the quantum process of complex thinking can be located in a part of the brain. But every cell of ours is an intelligent cell. And now that 60 trillion microbes that I was talking about, they're talking about it as the second brain, which determines more neurological functions than even our brain here. So now a lot of work is being done on how when you eat toxics, your gut microbiome is being damaged. And for example, glyphosate, it kills the shikimate pathway. Many of the bacteria in our gut have the shikimate pathway. And that means that many of the enzymes that these bacteria used to produce, which then produce the neurotransmitters that make our brain function, they're no more able to do their job. And it's not an accident that you're seeing such a, this exponential curve. If you look at all the chronic disease curves, they're like that. They're like that, including the neurodegenerative diseases. And the CDC's data is admitting that if at the rate, look at the rate of autism in America, 1 in 2 kids will be autistic. Yeah. So that is a damage to the neurological functions via the second brain. So intelligence is distributed, and I think one of, again, the arrogance was that first it was created that, men have a brain and women don't, and whites have a brain and the blacks don't. And of course, animals don't, and the plants don't. J.C. Bose, who was one of India's top physicists who actually did the early work on electromagnetism, he did work with plants and plant sensory response and intelligence. And he said, plants are sentient beings. And for a while they celebrated him and the Royal Society called him. And then of course the Cartesian system got panicky. Animal intelligence, look at the amount of work being done on animal intelligence. Bacterial intelligence, do you think all those antibiotics that are getting resistant because so much antibiotics is being poured in factory farms and that antibiotic resistance moving to us? Yesterday I was on our Indian Biodiversity Congress. I'm the chair of the National Biodiversity Congress. And the Biodiversity Board chair was saying, we've been put on this job that we have to look at the One Health, animals and humans. I said, well, how did those microbes become resistant? Surely that's intelligence. Intelligence comes from intellegre, the ability to choose, the ability to adapt. Or the Roundup weeds, the weeds that are totally resistant to Roundup in the fields of the Midwest. So I think this, some brain functions are located in the brain, but this is not the mind, and this is not the, the source of intelligence.
Okay, so you feel that they're putting a little too much emphasis on the microtubules in the brain itself. They should be including.
I'm not saying the function they found won't be there. I'm saying it would be wrong to assume that the only functions humans need. Just as it's wrong to assume that a few analytic methods that are mechanical in our mind, particularly in the left brain, them being downloaded in a machine and then being converted into algorithms and being called artificial intelligence, that somehow it's superior. It cannot replace spiritual intelligence. It cannot replace emotional intelligence. It cannot replace ecological intelligence. It cannot replace cooperative intelligence. It cannot replace compassionate intelligence. So all the spectrum of intelligences can't be reduced mechanically to artificial intelligence, just as much as it was ridiculous to imagine that all that amazing web of soil life could be reduced to a nitrogen phosphorus metabolite. We make too many mechanical mistakes. I think it is good to pause and assess the machines we use in terms of the higher purpose of being part of the sacred universe and the higher purpose of human life. In our philosophy, we call it Purusharth, the ends of human life. You must have a means of living. Doing the right way. And then doing the right way is the way you have transcendence, you have liberation, you have moksha.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing the space.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you, thank you. I just want to add, if you listen carefully to Stewart's theory, they talk about proto-consciousness that causes the collapse of wave particle function. So they don't call it consciousness, but proto-consciousness, which is really the consciousness what the mystics describe.
And to be fair to Stewart too, he talks about it not being a computative process, but just a tapping into a Planck scale of information, which is very different than Ray Kurzweil, who talks computation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, I think part of what, because your theme is wisdom in times of crisis. Wisdom is the amazing set of values, knowledge, guidance we get from the ancestors that gives us the guidance on how to live. Knowledge comes from the multiple sources of knowing, not just empirical sources, and not just idealism, the big artificial debates in Western philosophy. And then you have information. But knowledge is richer than information, and wisdom is richer than knowledge. And bits of information is what data is. And we are now calling data the new oil. So it would be good to realize that there are many, many, many levels of the way we know and the values we have that need to be cultivated. And yeah, of course, I'm not saying don't use data. I'm saying don't turn it into your new religion.
Beautiful. Next. Jamie, you're unmuted.
Jamie Powell, you're unmuted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. What an honor. Oh my goodness, thank you so much for everything you're sharing. I'm feeling the impact on in my local community from the wisdom that you share. Especially want to thank you for the talks you've been giving while you're eating. I can see you must be really busy with all the crucial necessity of the information you have to give. I want to say that where I live is in Oregon, and it is a mostly white state. And it was founded as a state to be anti-slavery, but the way that they did that was to keep Black people out of the state in the constitution of the state. And of course, the acquirement of the land was through murder of indigenous people. So my question about the soil and the significance of, as we tend to the soil in this area, the soil holding the memories of what happened on this land, and how as white people who are wanting to be the change, how can we make reparations in our world through the soil and through food and through efforts in that way? I'm curious if you have anything to offer.
I have been offered to Oregon. My son studied at Lewis and Clark, and I was a visiting professor in Eugene, and I remember they actually have a longhouse of the indigenous people there, and I did many meetings with them, and I think the first place to begin is to not as a ritual way on the street, people get up and we are in so-and-so land, and then they can go on to do their neocolonialism, but to really recognize the original people. And I think, just like we apologize to a tree, we apologize to anything we as we have, it would be good after that sentence, of saying we are in so-and-so land, to say, and we apologize. Because I think forgiveness is an important part of this. But the second is, the biggest reparation is to say, yes, our ancestors hurt your ancestors, but we have now woken into a new context, and we are part of an earth community, yeah? And let us now take care of this soil together. That's where, when I talk about building earth community, building food community, you can't build an earth community without beginning with food. There's no other place to begin. So I think that would be very powerful. And I have worked with a lot of indigenous people who are now working on saving ancient wheats and ancient grains. Of course, the wisdom of their grandmothers on healing plants. And I think it would be beautiful to not just say, we apologize, but to, and this I think is global, to acknowledge that indigenous people will be the teachers of wisdom for a future for humanity. So, when Vijay showed those two parts of the National Geographic, to not have that total destruction, but a regeneration. Who are the teachers for regeneration? Indigenous people, women, and anyone who has borne pain. Because pain is a very big teacher.
Hillary.
Hillary?
Hello.
Hillary.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm going to put it on speaker view. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Shall I go ahead? I was so inspired by the Mata Durga in you. And I'd love to share that and call on that. And my question is, have you any words of compassion to help me, I'm white, I live in England, in the East Midlands of Britain, and you know our history. I'm one of those people who has that backpack of white privilege. And I live in a very white society here. And I'm sensing a sense of dread, a wave of dread and fear in white people who have wonderful hearts, but they don't have the full understanding of the implications of white supremacy, white privilege, white this. Do you have any words of compassion for the waking up of this and the real fear I sense in people of having to admit it, come face to face with it?
I think that's where awareness comes in, an awareness of history, that yes, there was an East India Company created in 1600 by a bunch of merchant adventurers. And they got the Queen to sign a charter to say, go invade other lands. And the fact that it was called East India Company was largely to come to India because we were the richest country. We were 25% of the world's economy at that time with our spices and our textiles. And yes, that period was a very brutal period. And I think so, when I was talking about, if you look at it, where did Locke come from? England. Where did Bacon? He was the Chancellor and also the father of modern science. Who created the Royal Society? His thinking to make a birth of masculine time happen in science. Hobbes, the idea that you must have a controlling force, centralized. So, I think England was living through fearful times itself, that time, to have created so much of this violence on others, but also domestically. You know, I always think of it. I think of the witch hunts. You know, learned women were just burnt. You couldn't be learned. To awareness of history without getting burdened by it with guilt. You know, I think that's the worst thing you can do to yourself, because your history is part of a reality that you can't unwind. Yeah. And because that history required racism, otherwise, how could you capture blacks as slaves? It made the color of our skin a problem for the first time. I mean, we had done trade before that. People were of different colors. People interacted all the time. Color didn't matter. It was just different shades of the skin of one species on this planet. It was just part of our diversity. So yes, the white supremacy that led to the violence of that time is making a resurgence in the violence of our time. And I think we all have to be cautious. And I don't think ordinary white people should align with that white supremacy. They should distance themselves with it. And so we are not that. I have more to do with the black immigrant. I have more to do with the Indians that my ancestors colonized, because we are all building a new world where all humanity can realize they're part of one earth family. And white supremacy rising at this time is because of the multiple crises we are facing. And the problem is, because they use violence, they don't let anyone else come near them, you know? So they isolate themselves into these enclaves of gun-wielding, shooting school children kind of people. And sitting from here, I can't find a way. I would go hunt them if they were close to me. But I feel that ordinary whites becoming part of this change will also spread a consciousness into the others who, through insecurity, I really believe all violence comes from fear. And a lot of the colonizing violence against women and nature and indigenous people has come of fear of anything that's alive, and anything that's alive in freedom. And anything that's alive in freedom means it can do its own thing. And so there's this fear of, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose control. And so you see the rise of white supremacy. I think a big antidote is to allow other consciousness to grow rather than feed it through reaction. I went to the United States 4 days after Trump was elected for a lecture tour. And people would just cry, you know, people in the audience would just cry. I said, why are you troubled by one man? One man. There's so much humanity. There's so much life on this planet. Don't get obsessed with one man. Think of all the others with whom you can create another world.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow.
Wow, what a fierce wisdom, Vandana, you're bringing and embodying and part. Wow. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. For me, personally, I'm also coming a full circle. You were my hero in the mid-90s when I was very young and naive and I was angry activist. And I haven't done my spiritual work. And so I had to step out of that world. But now I feel like these two worlds are inevitably coming together. There is no other way. There is no spirituality without a movement from the heart and responding to the call of life, yeah, in each and every moment. So thank you for bringing these two worlds completely. They've never been separated, but in my ignorance, they were separated. And
you know, I think every harm and violence is a spiritual violence. And every harm and violence calls on us to intervene. And it does unleash an outrage. And I think spirituality is being able to distill that outrage into constructive creative action and activism. So yeah, I mean, a spirituality without activism is empty, and activism without spirituality can get misguided.
Absolutely.
This is the essence of the evolution of our organization and our community. You just, with that sentence alone, you just totally book frame this event, our work of 13 years and our life of, and I'm sure everybody in this room, in this circle.
Thank you. It was wonderful spending time with all of you.
Yes, there are many more questions, but we the time is
late. It's nearly 11 p.m.
Yes, you need to rest. You need unite. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, Vandana.
Good night.